Welcome back to the
Hello.
podcast. Today we're talking about Sufi mysticism, and of course we cannot mention Sufi mysticism without talking about Rumi, everyone's favorite poet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a continuing series we're doing on spiritual influences on coaching, and in particular our coaching model.
Yes, and Rumi, we hear like Deepak Chopra has talked about, made it popular. It's very his kind of timeless. His poems. I remember when I was single, I bought a book of Rumi poems, and I was like, oh, I want someone to speak to me like this. And then I realized that he was talking about God. He was talking about the divine, and I really love that idea. So I'm going to start off today with a Rumi poem called "Open Window," and I'm going to have to put my reading glasses on because it's in tiny print. So here we go. How would it be if you appeared in this open window? It would be as though my hands and feet were suddenly untied, and life was pouring back in. I would say I have not smiled or laughed since you left. Wine has no effect. And you would tease such melancholy, it may be catching. Then I would wrap my shroud around and offer my neck to your blade. Cure this headache permanently. You are the sole light in my eyes. Words drift out of the air. Let the musicians play now, the stringed instruments, the tambourine and the drum, since no reed flute is here today.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's one of those poems. It's not like, oh, I get it right away. There's like little, it pulls at you in different ways. Just the words and shocking with the blade. He has this, it's not this happy, positive. It's this like kind of there's a turmoil or like hunger in his poetry. It's like
absolutely.
The lost love, that we all can relate to as we're, in romantic love. It seems that kind of heartbreak of wanting the divine to come back.
Yeah, I mean, all mysticism, just to kind of put it in context, all mysticism is essentially that direct experience of the divine. And we know that it's an ordeal from the individual ego perspective. Getting to that point, getting to that rapturous moment of ecstasy, it's not easy. It requires sacrifice. It requires us to really surrender. And that surrender from the ego perspective it feels dangerous. It feels like a blade through the throat, to that we're in danger here. Just like true love, it feels like
heartbreak,
like a death, or that you're risking heartbreak. Yes,
it's almost like that romantic love has that power to buoy you up to like these heights of ecstasy, and also pull you down to like almost that feeling of destruction and heartbreak, and that's really not only romantic love, but that's what life is about. It's this kind of we have all these incredible joys and capabilities of having these profound experiences, being alive, but it also comes with heartbreak and pain when someone we love leaves or dies, or we have a dream that dies, and life is that duality of the pulling of those two poles. And so he beautifully talks about this idea, but mostly really it's that we're seeking the divine, and when we're feeling those heights of ecstasy, we're really connected to that divine in us.
it is a path to God, no doubt. But let's back up a little bit. So we're talking about Jalaluddin Rumi, or better known as Rumi in the U.S. He's a Persian poet. He was born in 1207 in what is now Afghanistan. And just to give you a sense of what a different time it was, the family was fleeing Genghis Khan at that time.
Wow.
He was kind of raiding that area. and they moved to what is now Turkey, and he pretty much lived the rest of his life in Turkey.
Is that why they think he's Turkish?
Probably.
A lot of people talk about him being from Turkey.
That area was part of the Persian Empire
yeah.
at that time, so that's why he's considered a Persian poet. And anyway, he's not only a poet and a musician and a dancer, but he was also a Sufi scholar. And Sufism was a lot older, of course. He didn't invent Sufism, but he came out of that tradition. There was already...
Go ahead.
Yeah, there was already a rich tradition of poetry, of music, of art being a way to worship and devote yourself to God. And
then what did he bring to Sufism?
Yeah, I think he brought a particular genius for poetry and for that crystalline vision, mystical vision that just inspired people. And he kind of founded his own school, and the whirling dervishes, that's where they come from. It was his idea of movement as a way of worshiping God. Yeah, and a lot of his poetry would come actually while he was in that ecstatic state, whirling around, and he would recite some of these verses.
Yeah, it's almost like a lot of like other practices of chanting and saying prayer, but this would be a dance, and I think it moves the creative flow and connection to kind of almost like you leave your body when you're dancing, even though it's a bodily movement. There's something about letting your body dance. It's like kind of a dance with the divine. It's like there's some kind of connection to you leave your ego mind leaves, and you're kind of open to this movement. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it was Nietzsche or Rilke, one of those guys said, I could never worship a God who didn't dance. It's there is that joyfulness of kind of intoxication with the divine that Rumi's talking about, that is very different than the concept of the West that we have in Catholicism or some of the more Protestant traditions, which is very somber.
We didn't do a lot of dancing in church,
right?
Except standing up, sitting down, standing up, kneeling, standing up, sitting down.
Yeah. But you see that dance in more traditional cultures, also Aboriginal cultures, Native American cultures, where dance was a big part of it, and repetitive dance especially creates that trance state. It generates a trance state.
A lot of some people that do Jungian work do the dance too. They do that kind of movement in processing the unconscious.
So you know more about the trance state than I do. How would you describe that state?
Well, the trance state, a lot of people think it's like empty of thought, but actually it's more hyper aware. You're more present than ever. If you notice that, that's why mindfulness is so popular, because we need something, because our mind is all over the place. It's very untamed. And so when you go into a trance state, it's almost like that place right before you go to sleep. You're in that hypnagogic state, and it's very kind of focused, and you're kind of like your mind is one-pointed. And it feels so good to that's why meditation is so wonderful for that, but you kind of get into that place where you're really focused, and then in that focus, it doesn't mean it's boring. It can actually be inviting a part of your unconscious in, having dialogue with aspects of your archetypes in your unconscious or your shadow, working with your feeling in your body and just being in that presence. So it's definitely not I'm knocked out and I don't have any, or this kind of your
zombie.
So it's a very hyper aware state, and it's optimal for. If you notice too, like when we're in dreams, it's that REM state is very close to it. you kind of are very aware of the dream at that moment. You're not like all over the place dreaming of 5 different things at once. It's very focused. So, and that's why I think, when any kind of spiritual practice, a prayer brings us to that trance state, brings us to this presence in the moment, because that's where everything is. And the ego loves to do the opposite, distract the mind and scatter it all over the place. And we really can't do anything. It's not very productive to be scattered and stressed, and the world is so busy right now that we tend to almost like the modern person has so much going on in their mind that they don't know how to like be in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, I love Rumi's work because it really introduced a lot of people to another aspect of Islam and the beauty of it and the mystical aspects of that. And you see how powerful it is that we're still talking about him 800 years later, and it's still as fresh. You read his stuff and people are still translating it or kind of trying to translate the truer meaning of it. Because I think the original or some of the early translations were done more in the sense of, oh, this is poetry about love, about romantic love. And there's certainly that element, but if you read it from the mystical aspect, it makes more sense. And so he introduced and kept alive this wonderful mystic tradition of poetry, of dance, of music, and art as being a way to worship and to express the divine. I've always seen that art has a spiritual quality to it, right? All these art forms.
Well, if you think about it, if your mind is busy, you really can't be creative with art. If your mind is, I have a lot of my clients that take dance training, dance lessons, and they notice that when their mind is like hyper worried about, can I say am I doing the steps? They're not as flowy, but then when they let their mind empty their mind and just be there in the moment, they can really start to get in sync. You just have to learn the steps and then you flow. And it's like that with everything. If you learn to be in that flow of that centeredness, anything it's more creative and more comes to you, more insight, more access to their deeper self.
Yeah. So going back to the world that Rumi inhabited, we know there was a connection to Eastern philosophy, to some of the Upanishads and Vedic philosophies, and so in the Vedas or in the Upanishads, you see that understanding. It says, "The truth is always one, but the wise call it by many names." And so here you see one of the different expressions of this way towards God. It is essentially seeking the same mystical truth, but it's a different path, right? It's a path of music, of poetry, of passion, working with the very powerful emotions of compassion and love. But it leads to that same place that the yogi is seeking, that enlightenment, that transcendence. There is a tradition from the Upanishads that's called Bhakti Yoga, which is very much related to this.
Well, even Catholicism, if you think about it, or Christianity, is that devotional, like kind of Jesus, like people that love Jesus, the same way they would love God, he's representative. So this like love affair with Jesus, like I love him. He's like almost like a romantic experience, not sexual, but romantic, like adoring and caring, just like we would a partner, just someone or a parent.
Right.
So, so what is? So you're saying that the real work is the heart?
Yes. So I figure we talk about Rumi's work and kind of some of the themes that emerge from his work, and then we can discuss it a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the first ones is that we see is that the real work, meaning the real spiritual work, is through the heart, right? Through passion, through emotion, through creativity. Here's a little quote from his work. It says, "My heart has become capable of every form. I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion and faith." And actually, this is by a woman named Ibn Arabi. So you see that Rumi's emerging from this tradition already of poetry, of expressing the love for the divine, the search for the divine through poetry, through this kind of metaphor of love.
You know, when I was single looking for love, I wrote a lot of poems to my true, like, please, come to me. And when I read Rumi, I was like, ooh, this feels similar. It's like this kind of relationship. And ultimately what I realized is that I was looking for the divine. And then when I found the divine, then I was able to find a relationship, but it's almost like you have to define that divine in you first. So you're not replacing this person or projecting that onto that person, and that weight of a burden you're putting on another person to be, you're going to be the divine answer to me. You have to kind of find it within yourself. So I love the poetry because it did get me to kind of explore my own emotions around what I was feeling and that yearning, and we do as human beings yearn the divine. Yeah. And so it's very similar, that kind of romantic angst is that we have, the ego has a yearning for.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that the romantic love that's there, that's inborn with in us, is really a calling towards transcendence.
Yeah.
Right? It's like an earthly model of what the soul is seeking. It's seeking union with the divine. And we experience it with each other as, I have this yearning to merge with this person, to become one, the urge to merge, like they say. But we see that when we experience that, in a sense, we're experiencing the divine. It feels divine, right? It feels like I'm outside myself. I'm transcending my ego, my limited self, and I feel connected to this person in a spiritual way. And so a lot of us, we don't take advantage of that because we think, well, it's about that person. That person is
my soulmate,
right? Or they're giving me that experience through their presence. But that can't be. It's arising from within us. If it wasn't within us, no one can
pour love into you like soup. It's not like they're pouring. Like I'm sending you love. Like no, it's arising from within you.
That's right.
That's, I think, one of the biggest misunderstandings about the divine and love is that we have to understand the idea of the philosophy of oneness. That everything we have and everything we experience is within us. And there's not an object out there you could send positive or negative vibes out and they're going to pull like that, kind of attract the right person or attract the right things. It's more, it's already within you and you're having the experience of yourself in the world. And so if you have an experience of separation from the divine and feeling like it's not in you, you're going to feel that other person is everything to you, and you're going to fall apart if they leave, or you're going to make them, put such, like I said, that burden of responsibility that you're going to take care of me and you're going to love me forever. And that, I think, is what causes a lot of those relationship issues. And I think that's why Rumi, if we understand his poetry, we start to see that we're really seeking, it invites us to examine what is this romantic feeling I'm feeling, this passion, this bhakti yoga, this devotional type of feeling.
Yeah.
And then we can have that higher experience in with another person, but we need to develop it within ourselves first.
So here's another one. Dying before you die. He says, in the existence of your love, I have become non-existent. This non-existence linked to you is better than all existence. So you see this transcendence of the ego.
Yes, the ego, death of the ego.
Yes, obviously it's a symbolic death, not the physical death. But we see this in romantic love too, right? This feeling of, I would be willing to die for this person,
Mm-hmm.
right? That
You give up your own ego for that person.
Yes, you're putting them ahead of you. And that itself is a spiritual practice,
Mm-hmm.
that you're able to transcend yourself, your ego self.
But in most, to kind of counter that idea, is that I think it appears as though you're giving up for someone else. But in not a higher love, it's more of I'm giving up my own like needs and desires, but there is a hook to it. Like if you stay with me, you know. So it's not that you're really giving up yourself in a true way, because you're still like attached to that person loving you back. If you haven't done your inner work.
Well, I mean, yes, but the ideal of love, right, would be that if you really love this person and they desire something else or someone else, that you would be willing to say, well, if that makes them happy, then that's what I desire for them.
It's like letting go of someone who wants to be with someone else. You love them enough to let them go. Yeah. I asked you once, a couple years ago, I said, how come we want to help make each other happy all the time? We're always willing to take care of each other. I said, what is that about us? And you said, oh, that's love. I said, oh. It's that kind of being willing to, make sure the other person's happy, but that would be only if it's mutual. Like you don't want to be just giving up like a doormat for the other person. I guess that's what I was saying, is that some people feel like they have to give up themselves in order to win someone's love.
Yeah, I mean, it's not completely unconditional, but it's getting there, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it serves as like a prompt, like a staging for us to move in that direction of the divine.
The next one?
So the next one says surrender to love. Looking at my life, I see that only love has been my soul's companion. From deep inside, my soul cries out, do not wait, surrender for the sake of love.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. And surrender, of course, again, means surrendering of our ego self.
Our attachment.
Our attachment to our selfishness, our limited self, for the sake of love. And here love...
But even attached to security, like I'm going to guard my heart. I'm going to be careful. The fear that we have around just opening up to our deeper self. Some people even, in relationships, yes, but also with God. I think there's people that are afraid to trust the divine. They're like, I could do it myself. I know how to do it. I don't trust that God's going to take care of me, or the divine is going to follow through, or the universe is going to follow through. I got to control everything. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that it's actually scarier to have their ego in charge than letting over to the divine. Yeah. So that surrender to love is like you're surrendering.
I had a lot of problems with surrender, of course, and I still do. I get to some extent. It is a process and a practice, I would say. But it is a very difficult thing for us humans to surrender the will, because that's really what we're doing. That sense of the I, the ego that we have, it like you say, it wants to control. It wants to stay in charge somehow. And the approach to the divine, it means that there's a higher will. Now, whether that will is coming from within or without, that's a different matter. That's maybe a question for religion. But for the mystic, the will is arising from within, but it's a divine will. It's not the limited ego will anymore. And that divine will often is leading you into spaces and places that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, the ego would resist it, and that's what resistance is. And so the surrender is about being aware of the resistance and kind of taking your foot off the brake.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, I think things that happen in our life we judge as bad, and in those moments we want to fix it right away, or we want to avoid it from happening again. And that it's in that surrender that if the worst happens, the divine has my back. I mean, I'm going to be carried and protected. And there's nothing. I can't die. I can't really die in a true sense. I can't be broken. And it's that kind of understanding that let go. And you don't know what you're going to learn because you went through this tough time, of what you can gain from it. And so if you avoid the tough parts of life, you end up being kind of very limited in what you can do, because those tough times stretch you and bring you to higher awareness. But we have to trust that something that looks bad to the divine may be thinking, this is your path.
Yeah. Rumi has this beautiful poem called The Guest House, where he says, whatever emotion shows up, invite them in. You know, they're guests, and we don't want to leave anybody out.
A welcome guest.
Right? Yeah, and it's such a great idea. You want to take the next one?
Chant the divine name. Lovers find secret places inside this violent world where they make transactions with beauty. Rumi. Yeah. And so is it the speaking of the divine, a practice that brings us... Well, what happens is, I guess the divine is this unlimited self, and then when we put it in name and form, it becomes into the waking world?
Yeah, I think it's a way of...
Just like symbols and words.
That's right. It's a way of evoking the divine. It is a way, because we know the word is very powerful. Just like in one of the testaments, I think the New Testament of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And I think the word in the Greek is logos, meaning this logos, this knowledge, this knowing of the divine, when you invoke it through the speaking of it, like very much like the Om, you're bringing it into presence. You're creating the space where it becomes real. It becomes your realization.
And so would that be why people have like rituals with the words, and they say prayers, and they speak of, like you said, the Om, they practice those. And then there's Sanskrit that people speak out.
Absolutely.
And they write it down, actually, writing down.
Yes, and poetry itself. Yeah. Poetry, one of the best definitions I've heard is that it's a way of saying what cannot be said. And that is the divine, right? You can't explain what is awareness, what is consciousness, because it's not an object. It is the experiencer. It's an experience, that experience,
not an object.
Yeah. And therefore, when we look for an object, we can't find it. You know, in the West, we're so conditioned to think, well, if we're going to figure out consciousness, let's look for an object. Let's look to see what part of the brain is creating consciousness. And you'll never find it that way, because it's not an object. It is the one that is looking for the object, the awareness itself.
So the next one, Working with Dreams. Do you want me to read that one? Another Rumi poem. We're getting a lot of Rumi today. This place is a dream. Only a sleeper considers it real. Then death comes like dawn, and you wake up laughing at what you thought was your grief. Rumi. Oh, I love that. Yeah, we have to, I mean, even in Eastern philosophy, the idea of Maya, this kind of movement, this dance of life, is illusory. it's an apparent reality, and it's like a dream. And in Jungian psychology, we talk about that the dream life, the dream world is basically identical. And I guess they talk about the Eastern philosophy too, to the waking world. So we are living a dream. It's all happening within our own mind. It's not as solid as we think it is. And even the grief in our life, it's not as, like, we grieve because we think we're the ego. Yeah. And we crave God because we think we're the ego. But God is, and love is always here and present. And it's the covering, the ego covers the reality and makes it into something else that's distorted from the truth.
Yeah, that's another universal of all mystical traditions, is that they see the separation, the ignorance, the darkness as illusory. Mm-hmm. It's not so much about good and evil or good and bad. It's simply we're either in ignorance, meaning not understanding that we are dreaming or that this life is dreamlike. Or we wake up to the reality, to the deeper truth of it, and we have a direct experience of it. And that's the mystic's message always, that there's a direct way to experience this, to know this for yourself, to realize it, in other words, to wake up.
And then you can enjoy it while you're here versus after you die. Say, oh, that was just it's like when we wake up from a dream at night and we think we're so scared, and then we wake up and we say, oh, that was just a dream. I would guess that that's what happens when we leave this body. We go, oh, wow. All the things, even on, like, you had worked in the hospital in your early career. You said a lot of people have all those deathbed regrets of how I would have done more. And it's almost like you get that, why does it have to wait until you don't have time anymore to really be bold in your life and take chances?
Yes, and unfortunately, it's not a good way to do it, to wait until the last few weeks or months of your life and then try to do this kind of work. It's much better to enter the process early on or in your midlife.
And I think that's why I like the coaching model, because it really gets people out of that kind of digging up the past and all that ego judgment of right and wrong and good and bad and pain and suffering and all that. And we get to, like, kind of a higher understanding of what our human experience is of potential. And not that those things didn't happen, but the quality of them aren't as solid and harmful as our ego says they are.
Yes, that's right. Because, if you think about memories of what happened to us in the past, they're essentially recorded from the ego perspective, from that sense of I. And again, if we ask what is the I, it is illusory because it is a function of the mind that creates that sense of I. But it doesn't really exist. It's simply like a reference point that the mind uses. And so when people hold on to this happened to me, or somebody hurt me, or somebody did me wrong, they're reinforcing that ego, that sense of I, that false sense of I.
And therapy is really designed to build up the ego. So there is a place for that to build up. But I think that most people have a strong ego, and that what they really want to do is they don't need to build up their ego anymore. They need to transcend it. And so that's what coaching is about. So that's the difference between, the coaching model and being able to look at this world and the delusion in a more positive, not positive, but more a way of possibility, an expansive way.
So the next one is...
this is my favorite one.
Become drunk on love. And Rumi says, lovers drink wine all day and night and tear the veils of the mind. When drunk with love's wine, body, heart, and soul become one.
He's not talking about wine, is he?
Well, is he? I mean...
I guess they drank wine back then, a lot of wine. But it's that kind of, I guess, that altered state he's talking about, where you feel this kind of passion and relaxation. And although a lot of people say when people are drunk, they're more their real self, and their true self comes out. Their ego is kind of not regulating the behavior, and it's like more of a open, like a truth. But I think it's more that that kind of drunk, not the wine drunk, but just kind of that feeling of not having the ego run everything, that kind of relaxed openness, that kind of feeling of less defensive.
Yeah.
That everything starts to become one, because when the ego's in awake and hyper alert, it separates everything and is defending and kind of not allowing, regulating the emotions and regulating creativity and logic and trying to organize. And then when we relax the mind, we can open up to our soul and our heart.
Yeah, I think you're the one that told me when we were first talking about how Alcoholics Anonymous had begun with a Jungian idea, or influenced by Jung, that alcoholics often are very spiritual people, and that they're seeking that transcendence through the substance.
They want to escape the mind, and they don't know how to do it, and and it's even like I've seen people, they know this life isn't enough. And like the same thing with depression, people that are just dissatisfied. It's actually a gift to feel this yearning and this incompletion and dissatisfaction, except they're using maybe wine or depression to, deal with it. But it is a calling. It's a nudge from our deeper self, that it's almost like a knowing that we know that there's more. We know, and that's why. When Bob Smith, actually, the AA founder, went to Jung, and Jung taught him about a spiritual solution to every problem, and helped him find that, replacing that human angst with a divine solution. And that's, I think, what this quote is from Rumi is saying, is that kind of like opening up to that yearning. Okay. Ooh, this one is for Deborah. Honoring the divine feminine wisdom. Another quote from Rumi, another poem. Woman is the radiance of God. She is not your beloved. She is the creator. You could say she is not created. Rumi.
Yeah, very profound. And you see this in mysticism as well, in a lot of mystical traditions. Even Lao Tse talks about the feminine spirit of the valley. He says, stick to that spirit, to that wisdom. It is the yielding force. It is like water, instead of the active force of
spirit.
Of spirit. And if you think about, okay, if the spirit is the father, then the material existence is the mother, in essence.
Like the world and matter.
Yes.
And she's the creator of the world.
Yes, and I think what we often miss, people that are seeking spiritual transcendence, that this physical reality is the divine itself.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not like a place you want to escape from. Like, I'm going to do my work and be a good person, and then one day I get to go to heaven.
That's right. And that gives it then a very different meaning, because now work, being in the world, is your spiritual path too. Right? Bringing music, bringing dance, bringing poetry into this physical existence, or apparently physical existence.
So all art is beautiful. Speaking, expression, everything is divine. And I also think that a lot of people think this idea that divine is all good and it's positive. And when we think about the divine, it can be destructive as well, because sometimes we have to destroy to create. So it's that balance of the creator that's also can be destructive, as we know. Mother Nature is, with hurricanes, and even the body, gets kind of ages, and so there's this kind of rhythm of life. And if we look at the seasons and that feminine material expression, it's like we are living in God. We are living in the divine, and we need to honor the earth. I mean, there's so much happening right now with climate change, and we need to honor this beautiful spirit. Like everything's so divine, and animals and creatures and people, we're all part of that expression.
Yeah, definitely in the West, which is really the predominant paradigm now. The material world was reduced to this dead matter. Rocks aren't alive; they're just these clumps of atoms, and therefore everything kind of was reduced to its economic base. How can we use that? It's raw material, that kind of approach. So it's no wonder that we've abused the planet, the physical manifestation.
We do that to our bodies. I mean, how much? Don't think about putting wine in your body. How much? Eat bad foods, and you look at the U.S. and 60% of people are morbidly obese. I mean, what is going on? We're abusing our bodies. We're abusing. We've lost that sacred experience, even of eating. When I was little, very Catholic family, we would have grace before each meal, and it's like we lost that ritual of honoring the earth. And I think a lot of people that love to farm or like to put their hands in the dirt, make plant in their garden. It's like that process. That's why it feels so good. Is because we're really connecting. Or even food, like for me, since COVID hit, being able to make meals has been like moving the matter, the alchemy in the kitchen. I do miss working, going out to dinner, but that idea, like you're really kind of, everything's divine. And so to kind of bring that into your life is really beautiful. And that feminine, and honoring yourself as a woman, for me personally, is because I grew up in a very patriarchal family, that it's beautiful to know that how the power of a woman, the power of feminine.
Yeah. That would be one of my arguments for keeping the mystical traditions up front. I mean, we're not denying the usefulness of science, but we need the mystical understanding so that we have a relationship with the material world in a more divine way, in a more mystical way, than just seeing it as dead matter and as raw material. And because if let's say we just approach it rationally, that okay, we can't destroy the earth because we won't be able to survive, it doesn't have enough power for us. We have to understand that, if I hurt a tree, if I pollute a river, if I do anything to the world, I'm essentially doing it to myself and to the divine, right? To the divine expression of things.
Well, I used to kill spiders because I hated them, and then now, since I've met you, it's like saving them is kind of interesting. They scare me, and they're just this little tiny thing, but I found it's something about just kind of taking it and putting it outside is like loving it versus this, you scare me, I gotta, crush you, this little tiny helpless little thing. And so honoring all life is beautiful.
Yes. And then finally, enter into an intoxicated devotion of the divine. Now, back to the bhakti idea.
It's like a passion, like you let it yourself, lose yourself in that passion.
Yes.
Like a kind of that's what art comes from, is that we just kind of lose sense of time, and we're just so in love with what we do that we kind of forget ourselves in a way, and we become intoxicated with it. Is that what you're saying here? Or
well, let's see what he says. Yes.
Let's see what he says.
Drunk with the ecstasy of love, I can no longer tell the difference between drunkard and drink, between lover and beloved.
So the difference between, God isn't separate. that you're experiencing God as God or divine.
Yes, and that is the mystic's gift to humanity. It's a way of understanding what is the nature of our mind, of our soul, right, of our consciousness. That awareness itself is the divine expressing itself in the world through human form.
To be one with the divine.
Yes.
That's the ultimate goal. But it's so hard because we have an ego that separates everything.
Yeah. And the idea that we can, let's say we can devote time and energy and focus to dance, to music, to art, to love, even romantic love, and even drinking wine together and sharing kind of that feeling, that warm feeling that it gives us, right, of being connected to the vines and the grapes.
The grapes,
and,
that's why the church drinks the wine. They have their wine ritual.
Yeah, that all those activities can be a form of devotion.
You notice they give you the wine right before they ask for the donation. So you're like, okay. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes.
But anyway, I love this idea of the devotion to the divine. And those, a lot of the people we work with are entrepreneurs and they're coaches and they're trying to like build a business and they have dreams and passions that they want to share. And we have to be drunk with that passion. We have to be one that the divine in us wishes to express itself through us. That kind of falling in love, that kind of like drunk with love with our passions and to live fully. And it feels reckless in a way from the ego's perspective is to, take the guardrails off and go and fail and explore the ups and downs of, starting something, creating something. But that's the beauty of life. And to be one with the divine as you do that, it's like almost like your duty. You have to.
Yeah. Can I ask you to read one more?
Sure. Do you want me to read that first one?
Yeah, I love that one.
Okay. Well, I wonder why it's called Undressing, Rob. I got to put my little glasses on. Tiny print. Okay, one more.
You got to have a hobby.
Learn the alchemy true human beings know. The moment you accept what troubles you've been given, the door will open. Welcome difficulty as a familiar comrade. Joke with torment brought by the friend. Sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets, to serve to cover, then are taken off. That undressing and the naked body underneath is the sweetness that comes after grief. Ooh, I got goosebumps from that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there you see the power of poetry. Again, that it's saying the things that we can't say in prose, that we can't explain. But we see in through just the images that these words create, that there's something deeper, right? Like an intuitive experience of truth, of reality.
Yeah, it's and that's kind of like individuation as well. We're undressing ourselves. We're taking off the persona, this kind of hard shell, kind of barrier that keeps us from really truly going deeper within ourselves and connecting in the world, inner and outer, and it kind of opens everything up to that rawness. And naked, in a way, is that intimacy we have with our deeper self.
Yeah.
And that makes us connect with other people in a deeper way and less defensive way, and we're open.
Yeah, the images I get also is that the identity that we have of with our bodies and our egos, our persona, are just the clothing, basically, the rags that we put on, and that we think this is who I am. But as we're able to discard them, take them off, that nakedness, right? That vulnerability that's there. That is the beautiful part of our human nature, and we discover that through this process of surrendering.
I love this, that when he says the sorrows are the rags of old clothes and jackets that serve to cover. It's like the sorrow is covering up our true nature. It's like old stuff, old past stuff, old understanding of who we are.
Yeah.
And if we truly know our true nature, the divine can never be harmed, can never be hurt. Nothing can ever be lost. It's all one. We're all one with everything. So we can't lose anything. It's like there's nothing to lose. It's like you're playing a game you can't lose if you are coming from that a divine place.
Thank you.
It's just an experience.
Yes,
Yeah. So I wanted to give a shout out to this book that I'm reading from, the Rumi Big Red Book. If you want to, some of the poems came from here. Are these other ones? Did that come from this or some other sources?
Other sources.
Okay. But this is a nice book. It's very thick. It's you just open it up and have wonderful experience. Coleman Barks.
Yeah, he's a well-known Rumi scholar. He's on YouTube if you want to look him up. He reads some of Rumi's work very nicely with music and
yeah.
like
So I wanted to give it a little, give him a shout out for writing this beautiful translation of his work.
Yes, and I've recently saw some videos of Rumi interpreters who read and chant his work in Persian.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So you can look them up on YouTube.
Yes. So hope you got your fill of Rumi today and Sufism. And we're going to continue our series next week. I can't remember what topic it is, but it's going to be about spirituality. We have some other program. We're going to talk about Zen, yoga. And then I think we're doing one on Zen. And so lots of different spiritual disciplines and how they impact personal development and coaching. And we thank you for joining us and hope you enjoyed today. And please don't forget to subscribe. There's a button on the lower right-hand side that if you hover over it, it's our little logo, which is actually the Om sign. If you click on it, it says subscribe. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and meet us here each week for another episode of Soul Sessions with Creative Mind.
Stay well.
So take care, and we will see you soon.